Hi all, I'm Roger White, the Corporate Communications Manager for NEC, and thanks for joining us for another segment in our Let's Talk series as part of NEC's Immersion Plus Symposium. Some time ago, NEC put out a media release pertaining to an area of education which has been identified as a potential one of increasing importance: examination fraud, particularly in the sphere of university degrees. And as it's turned out, issues come to the fore even more as a result of COVID-19 and the fact that universities in particular, education generally, is facing the stark prospect of more learning off campus. Facing the challenge of losing billions of dollars in fees through overseas students not being able to study in Australia at the moment and ongoing, institutions are having to quickly retool to accommodate out of classroom learning and, just as importantly, watertight examination processes. We all know that every time a challenge presents itself, there will be someone lurking in the background to take advantage of it for unethical means, and COVID-19 has potentially created that window of opportunity. It's a real and present danger, and today we're able to speak with someone who has been watching this space for a long time, and we're glad to have him with us today. Steve Godhino, the head of Software Solutions Professionals, GenX Ventures, who has a major focus on the education sector, amongst others. Steve, thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Roger. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So to get this discussion started, tell us a little about the history of GenX. It's Melbourne-based, but tell us where you began, please, and why.
So GenX is now in its 15th year. We started out as a business process automation company that focused on developing case management solutions for the banking sector initially, around investigations into fraud and anti-money laundering. We then broadened the scope of that to take it into the government sector, and we now have a thriving business in the area of license management, compliance management, and case management. But about 8 years ago, we were invited to build an examination delivery platform for the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. And to be honest, we didn't exactly know what we were getting into at the time, but over the years, it's proved to be, shall we say, a fortuitous involvement. And GenX these days delivers about 1 million assessments annually in some 51 odd countries.
Wow. You tell an interesting story, Steve, about verification of taxi drivers as the genesis of verification in education. Tell those seeing this session a little bit about that, please.
So about 4 years ago, we won a contract to deliver the taxi driver knowledge test in Victoria. And it was an interesting exercise because for the first time, we were actually doing stuff outside the medical sector. And it was a bit of an eye-opener in terms of just what people were willing to do in order to pass that exam. So the taxi driver knowledge tests had ridiculously low success rates in terms of people passing it in the initial stages, largely because there was a genuine belief amongst the people taking the test that because they'd been driving taxis, they knew what was going to be on the test, and that wasn't true. And then it sort of transitioned to being a real battle against people who were attempting to take things into the exam hall, impersonations, and so on and so forth. Now, this is nothing new in the exam sector. So people have been doing this for 100 years, or 200 years if you go back to the origins of written exams. But the fact of the matter is that, in the higher the stakes, the greater propensity for people to attempt to do things that are inappropriate. And one of the things that we were attempting to do was prevent people from impersonation or impersonating someone else, And that's where the conversation with NEC began around facial recognition.
Yeah. Steve, more than a year ago, I think it was, when you and I first crossed paths, and I was doing a piece on the partnership between GenX Ventures and NEC Australia. You were telling me about a very real and emerging threat, not only in Australia, but around the world, and that was examination fraud, and you just touched on that then. For our viewers here today that have joined us, can you please just explain what that surrounds?
Okay, so if you look at the way examinations are run, it's really something that was picked up in China in the early 1800s and taken to the rest of the world. So there are 9 billion exams which are run every year around the world. Most of those are paper-based, and anecdotally, every one of us will have heard of stories about when people carried cheat sheets into exam halls and all sorts of things. So this problem's been around for a long time. But over the couple of hundred years that we've had exams with us, the dependence on assessments to actually determine career choices, your ability to enter a profession, and so on and so forth, have actually increased dramatically. So effectively, you have moved away from what was truly an assessment of the knowledge and your ability to now an exam being your ticket to earn money. And that makes it an extremely high stakes issue for a lot of people. And from my perspective, I think that drives the inappropriate behavior. And we've all heard the stories about what happened in the US in terms of Ivy League college admissions, where there was bribery and impersonation that was rife in order to get the sons and daughters of Hollywood stars into East Coast Ivy League institutions. So it's around, it's there. Is stuff that we're doing right now going to get rid of it completely? Probably not. But to the extent possible, we have to have the structures in place to minimize the impact.
Yeah. And there may be some out there today that go, well, what's that got to do with COVID-19? But really, this issue's only been exacerbated, hasn't it? Because of the fact that there has been little, if no, access face-to-face between lecturers and their students in the classroom environment.
Yes, that's true. And if you think about it in the context of where most of the exams are currently conducted, and that's in schools, by and large, a teacher knows a student in a classroom. Okay, so the prospect of impersonation is practically zero. When you go into a university setting, that one-on-one engagement disappears completely, right? Unless they're honors students and so on and so forth. So especially at the undergraduate level, there is little or no, shall we say, knowledge of who your students are. And therefore, in an exam setting, you have to be particularly careful about, who is sitting the exam, because it could be someone who, and every university has, identity checks and so on and so forth. That goes on during, prior to and during an exam. It happens. Now, in a COVID type situation, because of the social distancing impositions, you have a problem where you can't actually run venue-based exams. And therefore, a lot of these assessments are now being taken into remote settings. So remote proctoring is becoming a big issue here. In a remote proctoring session, the way it works is that someone holds up an identity document that is verified by the proctor, and basically, the person sits the assessment. Now, realistically, that opens up a whole new vista of opportunity for someone to impersonate someone else, especially if the facial characteristics that are evident on an identity document aren't particularly close to what the person looks like currently. Beards, that kind of thing. My driving license, for instance, still has me with hair on. But the fact of the matter is, that's basically where something like facial recognition comes into its own, because it does, the 16-point check or whatever it is you guys have, and it tries to establish whether or not the person sitting the assessment is the person who signed up for it.
Well, you did only shave yesterday, by the way, but anyway. So let's get down to tin tac. So what's GenX Ventures and NEC done in their partnership to come up to tackle this potential fraud situation? Because what a lot of people don't know is this global phenomenon is actually an Aussie product. It was actually created here in Australia.
Yes. So for us, the original intent was to make sure that we could leverage some mechanism for preventing impersonation. So we incorporated the Genix, the NEC ID capability into the Genix assessment delivery platform as part of the upfront authentication of candidates. And that's the bit that's been rolled out to some 51 odd countries at the moment. And currently there's some 500,000 assessments that are conducted after the student has been authenticated using NEC ID. Our intent is to actually take that the next step and embed it into our remote proctoring tool, which is due for release in about 6 weeks. And there it'll be, allowing a candidate to take an assessment in a remote location, so not in a supervised venue, where they will be authenticated upfront, but then at various random intervals during the assessment to make absolutely certain that no substitution has taken place after the assessment began.
Sure.
So the bottom line for us is, in terms of ensuring the security and the integrity of the assessment, the facial recognition capability that we've taken on from NEC has become an absolute, cornerstone of what we do.
Yeah, and Steve, like to be fair, there is a lot of talk internationally at the moment about the value of facial recognition and privacy issues and whatever else. But in this instance, it's a very serious business, isn't it? And you could potentially have people without this that are graduating from universities that shouldn't be.
It's not just universities. It's a great deal more serious than that.
Yeah.
So we run assessments for GPs, for radiologists, for surgeons. Okay.
Got it.
Would you be happy if the person that's about to operate on you got his ticket to operate on you because someone else sat his assessment? I guess that's the big question. So yes, obviously, in social and in public situations, there are issues around privacy and the use of facial recognition. But when it comes to ensuring that, people who get to certain professional standards and you have to abide by them, I honestly don't think that's a breach of privacy at all.
Yeah, and 12 months ago, if we'd had this discussion, people might have gone, yeah, okay, I understand the principle of it, but it's even more important now, isn't it, given that so many people are working from a home environment or an out of lecture room, out of classroom environment.
That is true, because venue-based assessments will come back. We, as humanity is addicted to venue-based assessments now. But a fair chunk of that will shift to online remote proctored assessments. And it's in that scenario where you don't have an option of actually delivering an assessment in a venue because you can't get people into venues. In that scenario, authenticating a candidate using tools like facial recognition is an absolute imperative.
Education from overseas, Steve, education from overseas students is something like I think our third biggest earner nationally, behind the likes of agriculture and ore exports, even bigger than tourism. So surely what we've discussed today is a cost-effective and vital avenue for any institution handing out degrees and diplomas, as you were saying, not only in education, but health and so many other, potentially life-saving sectors.
If you actually go the next step, there is a push in the Australian education sector to actually move away from the model of getting people to come to Australia to study. There have been sort of research studies done by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade that have shown that, if Australian education institutions could take their delivery capability into the countries from where we source students, the opportunity is 10 times greater. So that will happen over a period of time. The key issue is, do you then deliver the assessments in those countries, or do you actually have the assessments delivered in Australia if they are Australian degrees? And this is where there's a little bit of toing and froing going on. At this point in time, though, you can't actually get those students who are learning remotely to come to Australia to sit those assessments. It's not happening. So if you are going to assess them, you have to do it remotely. Now, you can do it in one of two ways. You can stick them in venues in their home countries, but a lot of these home countries are no longer allowing you to stick people in venues because you can't do it safely. So the only other option that exists is a remote proctored assessment. And that's where the whole business of authenticating the candidate, monitoring them during the assessment delivery, and making sure there's no substitution during that assessment become absolutely paramount.
Yeah, so there may be some out there that just go, look, we're really over egging the situation during COVID. It's more a nuisance value perpetrated by a few, but the integrity of examinations is a very serious business. Is it a real issue? The integrity of examinations, is the fraud factor significant?
Look, it depends on what you call significant. In our experience, the issue is, so I'm taking all fraud, right? People taking stuff into exam halls, attempts at impersonation, all that sort of stuff. I wouldn't put it beyond 1 or 2%. But in the scheme of things, when you look at the number of assessments that are conducted, if you take 9 billion and you've got a 2% fraud rate, that's a fairly significant chunk. That means there are question marks over something like 180 million assessments every year.
From a financial point of view, Steve, sorry, I butted in there.
Yeah, no, carry on.
I was saying from a financial point of view, every institution, every business is always looking to work out where they can cut costs, make maximum profit. From a financial point of view for examination institutions, universities, whatever, is this a cost-effective way of examining their students, going to this model that we've talked about today?
In a remote proctoring sense, absolutely. So if you take a look at, the cost of delivering a venue-based assessment,
sure.
There is the cost of the assessment. There's the cost of the infrastructure that you put into the venue in order to run the assessment. The venue costs are then enhanced by having to have invigilators and supervisors and that kind of stuff. There is the cost of actually getting the candidates to come to the venue. When you take all of that and put that together, and then you look at the cost of a remote proctoring session, it's about a 70% saving in our estimation.
Wow.
So from a cost perspective alone, there will be moves to transition at least some of the assessments to this mode going forward.
Just from the education aspect alone, education in 2020 has completely changed, hasn't it, because of COVID? We'll never see the structure of it the same again.
On that score, Roger, I'm not entirely convinced. The education sector, unfortunately, is one of the slowest moving in terms of transitioning. So while the basic structures are unlikely to change, I do believe there will be some amount of change in delivery. So you'll have a lot more in the way of blended learning delivery platforms, where you have a combination of online delivery as well as classroom-based delivery. You will transition somewhat to, again, an increased percentage of remote exam delivery. How much, I don't know. But there again, it'll be dependent on how the education technology sector actually delivers capabilities that convince education providers that the exam delivery mechanism is actually secure. Because in reality, if you look at what is out there right now, there are, at least 15 different ways of subverting what they do. So, it's that kind of thing. So it's a trade-off between the secure exam delivery capability on the one hand, and the cost saving on the other. Now it is, and it always will be, more secure to deliver it in a controlled venue-based environment, despite all the flaws.
Yeah, Steve, I know that GenX Ventures doesn't only deal in the education sector. Just give us a quick overview, if you would, please, in what areas you also touch.
So a lot of what we do is in the regulatory compliance space. And there again, when people apply for licenses, for instance, if you were applying for a firearms license,
yep.
Authenticating who you are, especially if you're attempting to apply for it online, is an absolutely crucial set of activities. So, the whole concept of authentication in this online world that we're moving into is going to become increasingly important. You already have stuff on your phones to ensure that it's you that has the phone and not someone else. And then that is going to move into pretty much every facet of our life, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
Privacy or privacy.
Yeah, I like to call it facial recognition for the good in this instance. Yeah. Yep. Steve, we thank you very much today for your expertise and your time in what's a very timely and important discussion, not just here in Australia, but globally. Thank you very much for your time, and all the best to you. Thanks, Steve.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Roger, for having me.